It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, as we talked last week, there's going to be a issue whether or not the government shuts down over the next week or so. The Democrats, they will let the shutdown happen. There's some concern about the role of Minority Leader Schumer in all this.
First of all, abhor these government shutdowns. They're extremely disruptive. They're costly. Typically, the federal employees that are sort of go without pay for a period of time end up getting back pay, and that's costly. Mostly, it's disruptive to people's lives, and so I've never thought it was a good tactic to deploy. It's also the case that the blame assigned by the American people for a shutdown of the government typically goes to the party in power. So Republicans holding the White House, the Senate, and the House are not really in a great position to somehow take credit for the disruption that a shutdown would bring. So one might think that with the margins as close as they are in the House and Senate, that there would be negotiations, especially by the skilled negotiator, our president. But instead, after a rumor that he was going to meet with Democratic leaders in the White House, he's summarily dismissed the possibility and said there's no purpose in meeting. There's no reason to talk. The liberal Democrats, went after them on a very partisan way. And, maybe he's a great negotiator, but it's hard to understand the negotiating strategy. Now we learn, and I think the Democratic leadership has seized the right issue because it's very fact-based. If these measures go through, people will come off of health insurance. They will lose their health insurance. And the people who lose their health insurance are particularly people on Medicaid, people who are most in need of insurance. Quick side note, I mean, I used to represent and work with a healthcare organization, and asthma was one of the largest concerns of young people in the country of all ages. But for the uninsured child or young person, if they don't take the medication, which can really remove the symptoms of asthma, if they don't take the medication, they have an asthma episode, and they go to an emergency room or a hospital, where medical care is by everybody's measure is much greater than anything else. So the use of the medication, which a Medicaid patient can only afford if they're on health insurance, can prevent a much costlier process. So do we spend a lot of money on health care through Medicaid and Medicare? Yes, we do. But if we take it away from people and they're unable to get the medication they need, the cost is even greater. So the cost argument to me is fallacious. But it's also a very hardened view to say that if you don't support the big beautiful bill and you don't support the legislation on the budget, we're going to start firing. This is their negotiating strategy, Republicans, firing federal employees. This is what the White House said. So if you don't let us take away health care, we're going to fire federal employees. This does not seem to me to be a winning argument with American voters. And so I think Democrats, it's completely understandable that they would hold their ground. They would state very clearly who they're trying to help, and say, we're not telling you that we want and have to have everything we want, but we are telling you we have to be part of a process, and that's what the legislative process is all about. The people that the president refuses to meet with are the people's representatives. And so this notion that we're only going to work with Republicans who seemingly don't have enough votes to pass the measures is just a non-starter. I think we're headed for a shutdown. I don't know how long it will last, but I do understand the sentiment. And if you're not willing to even meet with a group of people, it's kind of hard to believe they're going to come over and support something that they deeply disagree with.
Al, what advice do you give Mr. Schumer?
Well, I think Chuck Schumer's in a very tough position, particularly because the last time the spending issue came along, he gave the president the votes to keep the government open, and ran into real resistance from a part of the base of our party. But to me, there's no really right strategy in this kind of thing, because you don't really know in the end who's going to get blamed. Craig's right. Usually the party in power gets blamed. And if that's the case, maybe the Democrats would be better off having, forcing a shutdown. But I'm not absolutely convinced that'll be the case. To me, there are two things that the Democrats ought to keep in mind, Schumer ought to keep in mind. The first is Trump does damage every day, and his challenge is to stop that. The budget is obviously one of the big issues that you have to deal with where he does a lot of damage, but the way he's going to really stop it is by having the Democrats have a good election in 2026 and winning the House and maybe even winning the Senate. So to me, his top priority from a political strategic point of view ought to be, what can I do that's going to put us in the best position to win in 2026? The second priority, and this is also a very high priority, is how do you, during this crisis, how do you avoid doing much more additional damage to our country, and to the hardworking people of this country? And as we've talked, as Craig mentioned and you mentioned, OMB sent out a memo last night to the federal agencies, basically, ordering them to fire, if in the event of a shutdown, to fire government employees, and then only to rehire them if they go along with the president's priorities. So that could be real disruption and real damage. So that's something obviously to keep in mind. The pressure Schumer faces is interesting. I mean, probably the base of the party wants resistance. They want to force a shutdown. They want to resist Trump at every turn. That's fine, except if in the end, with our leadership, when you think about Trump's numbers being down on every issue and overall, but the only people who have lower ratings than him are the Democrats, you sort of wonder whether in the end our leadership, as it is now, is capable of making the case that it's really Trump's fault. And the other issue to take into consideration is whether or not you're going to get concessions if you force a shutdown. And I'm not sure in the end Democrats will be able to do anything but back down if they want to reopen the government at all, because I guarantee you that Stephen Miller and the Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, and Russell Vought, head of OMB, don't give a tinker's damn whether the government ever opens or not, as long as they get their priorities in shape. So they're fighting a force that is not actually a force that wants to negotiate in good faith, and that makes for the interest of the government, and that makes it different. So I guess I'd suggest an alternative strategy, and here's what my strategy would be. First, make the arguments that you would make if you're going to shut down the government. Make a big fight over the ending of the Obamacare subsidies, which are going to cause a 75% on average increase in premiums next year for 20 million Americans. Now, that mostly working class Americans. I'd make the fight saying, on the Trump tariffs, which I call the Trump inflation tax. So that's the first thing. I'd make the same arguments you'd make if you're going to force the government to close. But then I'd find a way to get the votes to keep the government open. But the third part I'd say is to adopt the strategy that Reagan took, or the Reagan forces, which Jack Kemp took in 1977, 78, that we in the DLC took in 1990 and 1991, and that Newt Gingrich took in turning the House for the first time in 40 years in 1994. And that is to develop an agenda of your own. On the lines of our New Orleans Declaration or Gingrich's Contract of America, that clearly states what we stand for. Make that the only thing that Democrats in Congress talk about for the next year, and make sure in defining that agenda, we show that we are a different party than we were in 2024, that we learn from that election, and that we identify with the needs of the people that we need to win back to win the Congress. I think that's a much better strategy than getting into a months-long fight over keeping the government open. Because in the end, the only way to beat Trump and his cronies is to beat him at the polls. That's much more important than satisfying our base. Our base is going to come out and vote against him. I don't think it needs much motivation. I think the American people already know we resist Trump. And if we need to do is make this a referendum on Trump, and to take advantage of making it a referendum on Trump, we need to make it clear that we understand, that Democrats understand, that Democrats have to make it clear that we're not going to do things that are going to force swing voters, remind swing voters why they voted against Democrats in the past.
Craig, I also wanted to get you all to comment on this remarkable story now coming out of the Department of Justice, where the Attorney General looks like they will indict James Comey. What's your take on that?
Well, I think this is an unprecedented level of interference by the White House in the work of the Department of Justice and the Attorney General. The Attorney General is not the president's personal lawyer. The Attorney General is there to represent the interests of the people of the United States. And I really wonder, I don't know Pam Bondi. I know people who have known her and told me, she's a very solid professional lawyer and individual. At some point, Pam Bondi might want to ask herself how she's going to feel about being in the, top 5 worst attorneys general in the United States. I mean, it's just unbelievable that you'd go after somebody on such a nebulous kind of issue, and then you'd fire a prosecutor who failed to bring an indictment because there wasn't, a sufficient case to be made, and just keep pushing because Comey dares to speak out against Trump, and this notion that the president can put together a list of individuals who criticize him and turn it over to the Attorney General and have her send the FBI and Justice Department after people is seriously wrong, which ties to your first question in this sense, and that is, I think that, and Al mentioned polling, I completely agree with him. I think we're seeing not only support fading in the polls across the board, and that includes former Trump supporters who don't agree with what he's doing with handling the economy. They don't see him ending wars. They don't see him, really curbing inflation. And they're seeing levels of behavior, whether it's at the United Nations or the abuses of the Justice Department. And it's terribly worrying for them. And while Al and I talk about, and I know we both agree that the November 2026 election is key, we're getting closer and closer to when the people who are going to run for re-election in the Congress are beginning to look at their own polls. They're beginning to look at, well, if somehow the Republicans push through this budget bill. And if people are thrown off of their health insurance and the economy isn't getting any better, and by the way, health insurance costs are going up, energy costs are going up, prices on products are going up. If all that's happening,
Yeah.
and you're a sitting House member, all of whom have to run next year, if you're a senator who has to run again next year, do you really think these actions are going to help you in your election? So the election's a long ways away, but the reality of the climate in which these people are going to have to run is changing. And the kind of actions that Stephen Miller and Donald Trump are taking are just eroding confidence even among those people who voted for him. Because there's 70 million people who voted for him. They didn't vote for this kind of chaos. Yes, some are definitely going to stick with him. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. But I do think that the way his name won't be on the ballot, but his actions will. And when members of Congress begin to see that it's eroding their own support back home, it's going to give them some real second thoughts.
Al, you have the last word.
Well, I think the idea of trumping up a case against James Comey is absolutely incredible. It's wrong. And I think in the end, the president will pay a price for it, and should pay a price for it. You know, he has basically, he told us he was going to do that. He said he was going to be retribution. And the Truth Social post he made over the weekend, which Craig alluded to, forced the firing of the prosecutor and the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia because he wouldn't, who was a Trump appointee, incidentally, because he said he couldn't bring a case against Comey or Adam Schiff or Letitia James, who, and Trump explicitly names those people because he thinks they ought to be prosecuted. Because they were involved in cases against him, which incidentally, in every case, a jury, Adam Schiff was involved in the impeachment, and while he wasn't impeached because of the 2/3 requirement in the Senate, a majority of the senators voted to convict him, and juries voted in the Letitia James case, I believe, to hold him liable for fraud. The Comey thing is really interesting because there are a lot of us on the Democratic side who think Trump wouldn't have been president at all in 2016 had it not been for Comey dropping a letter reopening the case against Hillary Clinton after he had decided not to prosecute in the last 2 weeks of the election. But look, it's just wrong. It's like, when he just had his FCC chairman try to intimidate and did intimidate ABC to dropping Jimmy Kimmel, and ABC finally got a spine. Disney finally got a spine. I think Bob Iger just decided he couldn't stomach this anymore and brought Jimmy Kimmel back. But these are overreaches of presidential power. They go against the nature of democratic small d, the democratic system, and they're really un-American actions. Yeah. And so, in the end, I think Trump will pay a price for this overreach. This country doesn't always have a straight line for progress, but since our founding, we've always, in the end, come around to make the right decision to save our republic. And We will not have that kind of republic if the kind of actions that Trump is now pursuing continue. So I think we'll stop him.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much indeed. We will see you next week. It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all.